So what do you think?
Well,
Here's
we
our three cities: Salem, Sacramento, Olympia.
Olympia seems fairly, I don't know, maybe just a little harder to get to from the north at least. I don't know, you gotta go out the body of water.
Okay.
I was thinking the opposite way. I was going to say none of them have really bodies of water nearby. They're all like port cities, kind of, and so that's where the major cities, develop is that industry is already there. The trade industry exists. So as a result, there's going to be people there, and then when there's people, you have more activities and more things to do because of the high.
Well, they're comparing Olympia, Sacramento, and Salem to cities of equal size, other cities of equal size. So my thought, going back to like the local labor versus the export labor, is that since they're so near very large cities, that maybe other cities of equal size have more of a local labor market, so they're.
Let's see. It looks like we
creating
got
other
what,
goods.
12 miles or so on
They're all about like
eraser?
80 miles from.
Yeah, it's about 80.
Yeah, you're right. 10, 20, 30, 40.
Sure.
As the crow flies. So yeah, within 100, right? Within 100. All right. So what have we learned about big city, small city? Why would this be considered boring?
If their definition of boring is like it says here, in the sense that they don't have very good variety of goods and services, well, just like we learned that there's a smaller demand per capita for certain goods in smaller cities, but in larger cities there's more population, so there'll be a greater demand for some of those more different goods that aren't like necessities,
Right.
kind of like the opera and
More of an ability
Yeah,
for them.
and so how that evolved over time is a different question that we explore. Why Seattle became big and Salem remained, or this is Portland and Salem. Why they got that way would have been due to other things that, we might have been going on with localization economies and urbanization economies. So, but once it gets to a certain point, then the city with the opera or the new football team or the whatever, right, they're going to go to that bigger city because of those factors with demand and that these folks are willing to drive that far. And then it starts to build on itself. And so cities grow into what we're finding in with some of the data we're looking at, where you've got the one big city and then they start chunking down from there pretty fast. It's a pretty big hockey stick was the graph that we were testing last time, where the rank of the city, the biggest city, the second biggest, the third, that starts to look like that pretty fast.
So could we look at maybe a city that's equal in size to Salem around and see geographically what?
Olathe, maybe?
I will let you do that on your own and just tell me your results. What would you like to see? I don't know what. My point is that we'd have to take up a lot of class time to really dig into
my
that.
assumption is just that, for example, like a city the same size as Salem, Olympia, or Sacramento is going to be further away from, the larger city that would be an equal size to like Portland or something.
Mm-hmm.
So their accessibility is going to be a lot less to be able to get to the larger city.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying they would have more variety or less?
They would have more variety in a different city since they're further away from the larger cities, is my assumption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why don't you check into that and bring it back to class? That'd be interesting. I wouldn't mind checking that out. Sounds like a reasonable ploy. Maybe that's your paper. Yeah, that's part of what this is. You guys got a paper coming up.
Sure, I'll do that.
Okay. Let's see. Before we get to your questions, then let me. This might be as good a time as any to get into the last section, which was the appendix, which basically repeats some of the themes that were in there and just applies a little bit different concept. So there's just a few slides here to run through. It's called central place theory. So it tries to tackle this question. Let's see, how did this thing do? No, not too bad. Okay. So we're going to build a little more of a graphical model than anything else. It could be done with some equations, but so let's not have any externalities involved with shopping. Uniform population density. We're going to take a piece of land and have people equally spread across the chunk of land. Ubiquitous inputs. What was that again?
Everything going in is the same. It works as well to go into each other.
Yeah, it's easy to get. They're kind of costless to get. Again, it's kind of a big assumption, but there's no issues with inputs and locations and that sort of thing. And then there's a uniform demand for each product. So we've kind of just got something in a fairly square box. So we've got three industries: jewelry, books, and pizza. And so we talked about those demand areas. And the jeweler has found that they need 80,000 people to support one store. So that's our opera, that's our brain surgeon, right? So we need a large population to support that business. Books, on the other hand, 20,000. Pizza, just 5. So we've got a number of different goods, and we want to think about a region that has a population of 80,000. So if I take a box from what we've discussed with the median location theory, we touched on this. If I've got 80,000 people in this box, where do I put my jewelry store?
In the middle.
Right in the middle, right? So that's going to minimize transportation costs for all of my clients. I wouldn't want to put it here, I wouldn't want to put it here. So that's kind of what was similar to our median location theory. So there's where our jewelry store goes. And then what about our bookstores?
In the middle of each of the corners, like divided up into boards, top one right there.
Right. So you can think of just starting to separate this thing out, and then think about how cities would form in relationship to that. So we've got a large city, medium cities, and small cities. In the large city, there's 80,000 people, or the market area is 80,000. As people start to move towards the center due to urbanization and otherwise, it's going to be more dense of an area. That area then could support a couple bookstores and some pizza places. There's still some leftover folks to distribute out into some medium-sized cities. And there's the carving up of the two spaces again. If we've got an equal distribution of consumers across the whole space, and we've got these people focused in on here, then two new cities could form around the bookstores. So we got one bookstore here, one bookstore here, kind of picking up the residual of the 80,000. So we got 20,000, 20,000, and 40 in the middle. And then finally that leaves some room then for more pizza places to start up. So here's Ottawa over here, right? And we've got access to downtown Kansas City and Gardner or Olathe or something like that. All right, so this is known as central place theory or central place hierarchy. Yeah.
In order to figure out, like, you're looking at, like, kind of like Kansas City, do they have to, like, plot out the land to figure out where the square was in order to put the city? Does that make sense? Kind of like we're doing here? Like the developers? You know, because on a big scale, it's like, oh yeah, here's the middle of our
So
square.
the
You know,
evolution of it is much different than what it might end up at. And so this type of stuff approximates potentially what we might observe, but not what the actual circumstances are. So we've got the river cutting through you know, if we start putting together the story behind Kansas City, we can go back through history and say what were some of the early businesses that started and why did they locate there. And I think part of the story of Kansas City, which I don't know very well, I've only been here for about 3 years, is the river was a pretty big deal, and they started the first hotel right off the bank of the river. Have you guys been down to the River Market area in Kansas City? It's a pretty cool area, and they've got some of their historic landmarks there. And then as that starts to grow, then new businesses might start, so smaller businesses might be still far away, so it might kind of follow this setup. But then the next big business comes in that needs a big market area, they need to be there too. Okay? All right. So under this model, under the restrictive assumptions that we have, we start to see this hockey stick again, where you've got the one big city that supports those types of industries that need a lot of bodies, and then you've got cities that spread out around them, giving us that look again. All right, it's the same thing there that we saw earlier. One of the big restrictions compared to other models we've looked at is the location with inputs. So that ubiquitous input thing is kind of a different animal. And so we kind of take these bits and pieces and try to get the better insights into the overall puzzle of life. Okay, so let's get back to your questions now. Oops, did you want that up there? No, I can't get it up. So on your homework, which ones would you like to review? Number 7, okay. All right, so did you have a particular part of it that you needed a little nudge on?
I worked through it and I had numbers down, and then when I looked, I didn't understand their numbers and where they're coming from.
Okay.
Because some of their, it says that each industry employs 300 workers, but then some of them have larger numbers than that in the totals, and I was just
Okay.
really
So consider a region with 3 industries subject to localization economies, each of which employs 300 workers. There is a single cluster for industry L. All firms in the industry locate in a single city labeled L. 3 clusters for industry M. Firms are divided equally between the 3 cities labeled M1, M2, M3. And 5 clusters for industry S. Firms are divided equally between the 5 cities labeled S1 through 5. There are no urbanization economies. So what's that again?
that's where they go across the street.
Okay, so they diversify. So localization economies are growth within. Why is the growth occurring?
Population density.
No, I mean it increases, but what is localization? Within an industry. So whatever there is, our button maker, our dressmakers around there, so there's an industry of dressmaking that's building up. That's the localization economies. And this says there are no urbanization economies. So in a city with 300 export jobs, there are 3 local jobs for each export job. In a city with 100 export jobs, there are 2 local jobs for each export job. And a city with 60 export jobs, there is 1 local job for each export job. All right, so we got a 1-to-1, 2-to-1, different ratios. All right, so the numbers, this part A filling out the table is what's giving you a fit? All right, so anybody want to jump in?
They can still have 300 in each of the regions. It's just that there's different sizes of cities. Like the large city only has 1, with all 300 of the workers clustered together. The 3 medium cities have the 300 workers spread out over 3 cities, so it's 100 each. And the small city has it spread over 5, so it's 60 each.
So with the table, how are you justifying it, John? So you got S, M, L,
Export workers.
60, 100, 300, and local, yeah, what is it, 60, 200,
It's 200 because it sounds to
900, and then our total employment. 120, 300.
So the local jobs aren't part of the industry, basically, right?
No,
You're
that's
saying that
what
right? Okay.
Right, the local jobs are just like,
That's where, okay.
those are
I thought
like
the
pizzerias, other things like that.
Yeah,
I
that's-
thought the total could be greater than 300. So
Okay.
that's where I was-
Yeah, that's a good point. So, and that's an important point of this, and what we'll be getting into in chapter 5 is this multiplier effect, is what's going on. So, export job versus local job, what's the differences?
Local jobs, working on stuff that's being consumed in the city. Export jobs, making something that's going elsewhere.
Something that's going out. So, within our city, we have a mix of local and export employment. And whatever these guys make leaves the city. So when we add an export job, we bring in bodies who then have to shop at the haircut place and the pizza place. I don't know how I was going to draw a hair. The haircut place, the pizza place, all the other local jobs that we're familiar with at our small town cities, right? So that's the thing we're trying to build on, is how with that multiplier effect, how they get bigger. And I understand what you mean by it wasn't perfectly clear that how those the way it's worded.
Like with it saying no urbanization economies, I thought we only have like the one industry, so I was confused. Having the export workers and the local, the wording.
I think it meant like no urbanization and export jobs like that. Right?
So you raise a good point, Chelsea. The urbanization economies is not necessarily the haircut pizza things. So we're talking about maybe 2 industries that use highly educated people, let's say, and one's in biomedical, and the other one, Ames, Iowa, comes to mind. So we have the second highest per capita amount of PhDs in the nation, second to Boulder, Colorado.
Ames?
Ames does. Ames, Iowa,
And
which is
Boulder?
a town about 50,000. So per capita,
Wait, you're
like
saying-
if you had a PhD up there, like I did,
Not a big deal.
everybody. So what else is new? Come to Ottawa, of course, there's not too many at all. But even in bigger metropolitan areas, you go to Kansas City, Olathe, but very dense with PhDs. Dense PhDs are not uncommon to find either. So the urbanization part is being able to fuel off of that in diversified industries. So it's not like we were all there for biomed, right? There might be other industries that you're there for as well. And so the urbanization part, the diversity, is building on itself because it happens to have that resource base. And that's the urbanization part. We still need the haircuts and all. That's kind of a separate issue that may not be related to the urbanization. Does that make sense?
So this multiplier, I'm not saying that it's like set in stone or anything like that, but
No, it's definitely not set in stone, but
I mean, is it relative in a sense? Like if you have one large city but that's in a certain region, and maybe on the other, like another region that neighbors that, like, would they maybe even have the same distribution of local to export workers, even if their sizes are not?
Yeah, and we'll get into that a little bit more in chapter 5. Yes, but because there's a number of in the real world, again, there's a number of other variables that
Yeah.
might be playing into
But looking at
whether
these
that is, like,
models.
let's say there's high-speed rail between two cities or something. That might make a difference on the multiplier effect. Yes. Okay. All right. Any other ones on this chapter 4? 10? Okay. Consider a region with 2 export products, gloves and socks, and 2 local goods, tattoos and manicures. The production of each export good is subject to localization economies, so each city specializes in one export good. According to and so what do you think about that statement? Does that make a little more sense after the discussion we just had?
Yeah.
Does that help? Yeah, because I think that's where some of the confusion was. So the production of each export good is subject to localization economies, so each city specializes in one export good. So each city is going to have one of these localizations because there's not incentive for the urbanization by assumption of the model. It's better to glom on to the industry, so the dressmakers all grow in this city, and the socks or gloves, each one's going into each one separately. And that's just kind of how they evolve over time. So according to Mr. Wizard, if my 2 assumptions, one for export products and one for local goods, are correct, all the cities in the region will be the same size. Assume that Mr. Wizard's logic is correct. List his assumptions and explain why together they imply the region's cities will be the same size. Okay, so what did you think about that relative to the answer here? Anything else? Was that the fogginess, or did you want?
Yeah, no, the question I thought was funny.
The question.
I
Yeah,
got
what's
the
it asking?
answer.
It was really badly
Mr. Wizard.
worded.
Yeah.
When I read the answer, I understood why it was
You just have
what
to
I
figure
just
out what
didn't get what it was asking.
what the guy
Yeah.
is supposed to be assuming, so what
Right.
assumptions he's making.
Kind of what you'd need to get back. So the so on the answer here, the 2 export goods have the same degree of localization economies. So in order for you to get equally sized cities, they'd have to have the same degree, which is somewhat maybe what you were talking about, kind of the degree to the localization, so that the employment would be the same. Assumption number 2, the 2 local goods have the same per capita demand relative to the scale economics in production, yeah. All right, and so those were kind of buried back in the chapter on the assumptions we're operating under on the growth of these numbers. Okay, anything else?
So for chapter 4, you mainly want us to understand reasons why, like about urbanization, localization economies, and how they form.
Yep.
That's
I
what
mean,
we
if you
want.
go back through the, kind of the objectives of the chapter, yeah, these problems are there to kind of help you pull back and get a deeper understanding of it.
Because there's not a lot of math with this chapter, right?
Nope.
Is there? Okay.
Nope, and I had mentioned 4 and 5. There's going to be a little less math. We're going to get into some elasticities in chapter 5, but so there'll be maybe a little more math here in chapter 5.
Do we know when the test is going to be?
We could know. I'm up for debate on that because we're going to be through chapter 5. So I was thinking at the earliest would be next Thursday, and the latest probably the following week. And I don't really care.
We would go through chapter 5 on Tuesday and Thursday.
We're going to get through a lot of chapter 5 yet today, because it goes pretty quick, but there's more to go. So like I said, the earliest would be next
Would we review
Thursday.
the class on Tuesday if we had it on Thursday?
Yes. I'd do some review, and we'll just push it ahead if we didn't make it to there. So,
Yeah. The following.
you guys got some big deadlines that you want to just push it off?
I won't be here Thursday anyway, so.
Following Thursday would be nice. Is that that too late?
The following Thursday.
It's like not next week, the week after. So it's
Next-
Friday.
That's probably pushing it out a little bit.
Is that Tuesday?
It's
Is that
only the
Tuesday?
27th.
That Tuesday would be fine.
That's fine.
What'd you need?
I think I left my glass cleaner in here this morning.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
All right.
Jason, your core.
I'm so sad.
So that puts us on the 25th. Tuesday the 25th.
Chapters 1 through 5.
Chapters 1 through 5.
Multiple choice, short answer, what, any idea?
Yeah, a little mix of all of the above. I haven't written it yet, so I'll tell you more as we get closer. So, February 25.
Don't worry, Lynn doesn't write her tests until like the day before.
Oh, I've been known to write them, finish them up anyway, the hour before. So that's the life of a professor. Sometimes you have good plans that don't always get lined up with everything.
I just hope it's not.
I
this
will,
test.
yeah. You can hold on to it for now.
That's all my-
It's a lot of information.
Okay. So with that, we jump into chapter 5.
Do we have an out of class review on Monday?
Yeah, that might be very much.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with it.
What?
Because I won't be here Thursday. I'm just being greedy.
What do you got going on?
I'll be in Phoenix.
Phoenix.
Yeah.
Rough.
You on vacation or?
No, Board of Trustees meetings.
Just.
All right, so we're going to look at growth. So we've kind of set the stage for
What's that?
uh,
Where do you go?
Why don't you be your mind?
It's been a.
some of these growth issues on why cities grow, but we're going to expand on that now and get into some supply and demand curves. I know that's pretty exciting. We're going to get into some elasticities. So that's we use that stuff because economists are in the prediction business, right? So we can talk about the localization economies and the urbanization, and it kind of helps grow. Well, at the end of the day, what separates economics from a lot of other disciplines is that we're going to try to quantify that. Like, and economists spend a lot of time trying to say, well, how much will it grow by if I do this? What if I add a new recreation center that has a water slide? What's that going to do to my city? You know, it's a $5 million project.
There's a funny quote.
Is that going to help us or not? What's the quote?
Chapter 5 starts off with kind of what you're talking about. An economic forecaster is like a cross-eyed javelin thrower. He doesn't win many accuracy contests, but he keeps the crowd's attention.
Yeah, that is a good one. The other one I think I've said in classes that I think I've somewhat butchered. I heard it so long ago, I think in graduate school, that I think I'm butchering it, but it's stuck in my mind, at least the concept of it. Economic forecasters is kind of like taking a loaded gun, pointing it with the blindfold on through a smoke-filled room at a moving target. And that's what economic forecasting is like. trying to hit the target. So I don't remember who to give that to. Okay, so here's our utility curve we developed in chapter 4.
Yep.
So imagine we've got two cities that are identical to each other. So imagine we got a city that looks like this. We talked about getting to the steady state equilibrium here of 6 million. So we got two cities with 6 million. I guess this plays nicely into that last one we just did. And then suppose there's an innovation in one city. So one of these two $6 million or 6 million person worker cities, there's an innovation. what happens to the utility curve? All right, so we have the utility curve shifting up. Why?
Because the innovation allows for population growth at that same utility level.
But the
Not populate. Did you say population?
Well, at that current utility level.
Okay, Chelsea.
I mean, I guess it's not more like you get a greater utility at the constant population level because
Both are true.
of the innovation. I mean, like there's less cost for the people that are there.
Okay. So yeah, where do we get utility from is what we got to start thinking. So what does innovation do for us? When we talk about changes in technology or innovation, I mean, what does that affect in the economy?
Cost.
Cost, why?
Lowers transportation costs or anything like that.
Okay, Colby?
Efficiency.
Efficiency. So in the production side, right? If we think about the marginal product of labor, if there's an innovation in a city that can increase their productivity, that means that employers can pay them a higher wage leads to higher utility, right? So there's kind of that interplay going on when there's a technological change. If we go back to the old production possibilities frontier, our old friend here, the PPF, the maximum combination of two goods an economy can produce given its available resources and technology. If technology increases, it shifts out the production possibilities. Now, what if that technology was only with pizza? Does that help out consumers who like beer and pizza? So if the technology only affects pizza, how does the shift look?
Skewed out.
It's
towards
skewed
pizza.
out, right? So it doesn't move here at all, right? If we devote all of the new resources,
Longer.
this new technology, this new innovation that helped out pizza, it doesn't get us any more beer, but it gets us out to here. But the important concept to remember is that if we started at point A, a little upside down, we could still move to a point like B. We could have more pizza and more beer from a pizza innovation, right? So those two things get shared. Why? Where do we get that from? Somebody justify that.
They are, what's the word when one good, like you use one good to consume the other or whatever?
Substitutes, complements.
Compliments. Does that have anything to do with this?
There could be something in there. I'd like to tighten that down. Chelsea? You look like you're pondering something. I didn't mean to. You're ready to jump out of your seat. You look so excited.
By like an innovation in pizza, like in making it more efficient to make pizza, like you can make more of those, but you're also gonna have more time to make more beer because of the less time to make the pizza.
Yeah. So if you have a labor-saving technique in pizza, and assuming that pizza laborers are not so honed into just pizza only that they can't do anything else with their life, that they're worthless if they can't make a pizza, assuming that they can go work for the beer man, right? Then there's a substitutability with, and there could be complementarities in there somewhere too, but there's a substitutability
Of the labor.
of pizza labor and beer labor. And so a labor-saving technology for pizza frees up human beings to go work for beer, and so it changes the allocation of
Does
the,
that really
of the
happen
resources.
now? I mean, do people
Sure.
really do that?
Absolutely. What do you mean?
It just seems like pizza people, like an innovation in pizza, some people would be completely oblivious to, oh yeah, I can spend more time making beer now. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't add up to me.
No.
Got to think about. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, you don't see a lot of pizza places with their own brew.
Well, I guess at that point it's more so the firm, like the company would be like, oh, we can make the same amount of pizza and our demand's not changing, so we're gonna lay off people, and they're probably gonna go work for the pizza.
That's right.
company.
When you're
In this
unemployed and you got to
case-
be retrained to find something else, or
That
your
makes
wage is stagnated. Hey, I was making $10 an hour 4 years ago. Why haven't you bumped me up a pay? I got this machine that does it fine. But I heard the beer man's, his wages have gone up by 3% every year. Oh, Maybe I should go work for him, right? So you don't get caught up too much in the fine minutia. Sometimes it's good to jump in there, but we got to think a little more fluidly about the labor market in general, and that some of these resources can be used in multiple areas. Okay, so there we go. We got our new city. What happens next? Two cities now, right? We got the innovative city, we got the old city. We got two cities still, 6 million. There's the new city with the wham bam, new innovation. There's the
People move until the utility levels equilibrate.
okay. So which one's moving where?
People,
What's that? All right, I's moving to J. So people are getting out of here. They're going to migrate towards the innovative city. Why? Higher utility. That induces them. There's higher wages, higher, whatever. As they start to leave, utility goes up for the people who stay. Why?
Because there's less people.
Less people, less congestion. So we got those competing forces going on. Now it's getting less congested. As they move to the innovation city, it becomes more congested. And we get them stopping when they're equal.
Okay.
Okay? Did I go? Sorry, I didn't mean to go so quick. I thought because I said it. There's the one before. When does it stop?
Makes sense now.
So now there's no more, because utility's the driving factor here, and we've got, because of those competing forces, we've got utility going up, utility going down, and we still have two cities, but they're of different sizes at the end of the day. We've got a city of 5 million and a city of 7 million instead of 2 6s where we started. Now, did we get the concept of both parties were better off due to the innovation in one city, not the other? Did that help only the people in the one city that thought the good idea? No. So that's our end result, our end game when we've got mobility of the factors of production, is that if we have migration available and we've got these factors of congestion and wages that we've talked about to build up to this point, then that benefit of innovation gets shared by people who weren't a part of the innovation in the first place. Whoever the people were in that city that developed that innovation, that ended up ultimately getting shared by everybody. Prosperity for everyone.
Because the innovation sparked change in one city, as long as there's change in the new city, it's going to benefit because people leave.
Because of the, yes, because of the
Makes them scatter.
changes.
Makes
Yeah.
it scatter.
Michael?
So I guess trying to, I'm going back to like the whole rational expectation thing or all that.
You like rational expectations.
Well, I kind of like it right now because I'm trying to figure out a way to define this idea. But so like the short-term gains are fueling the long-run benefits in a sense.
Yep. Which
Of
is
everyone.
which was kind of the result we got here again. Innovation comes along with the production possibilities that benefits only pizza production. The only benefit was to pizza production, but it ultimately got shared by everybody, allowing higher production possibilities for everyone. Here we flipped that into a utility type analysis, allowing the migration of labor. Okay, all right, so next step. All right, this is just a summary of what we just said. So give that a read. Alright, so any ideas on how to measure human capital? External benefits from an increase in human capital. What's going on with that sentence? Kate, chime chomping at the bit.
I'm just thinking through, and I was thinking maybe external, like public opinion.
Okay.
Biblically,
So when we think external benefits in this regard, we're thinking externalities.
okay.
So what are those again, Adam?
Externalities, third party, whatever, like, get affected by it.
Yeah, third-party benefits or
Benefit or loss,
costs.
yeah.
Yeah, benefits or costs. So third-party benefits or costs, and the third-party part was that they weren't directly related in the transaction to begin with. And so external benefits coming from an increase in human capital. So what's the human capital part?
Is this total human capital or available human
I guess available.
capital? Okay.
I don't know where you're exactly going with that, but
Well, with the beer and pizza, I mean, you have an increase in available human capital if you have a labor saving
okay.
versus.
Capital, like education and skills, though. Is that
Yes.
one way to measure human
That education and skills is kind of the human capital element that you want to keep in mind. So it's kind of the quality of labor. A lot of our economic models have L. L equals 4. Well, if you've worked at any restaurant, you know that the value of each one of those 1, 2, 3, 4 are vastly different from each other, right? So, and part of what that difference is what economists call the level of human capital within each L. And so it's a variant of that. Now as we step back and look at the size of a city, though, how would we measure the potential human capital within a city?
How would you measure it?
Yeah.
By the percent of increase in wage or whatever spilled over from the books.
Okay, yeah, you're jumping up to this. I kind of wanted to just focus first on human capital. How would you measure human capital?
Well, the amount of things they produce within a given time period.
I'm not as concerned about their productivity at this point, other than
Say, like-
I believe that higher levels of human capital lead to more productivity.
Literacy and.
So literacy within the town. So if you've got a population of 60,000, how many are literate? What's that? How many are PhDs? How many are literate? How many are high school graduates? How many are college graduates? Right? These are measurable things that we can look at in the demographics of the population. Okay, so the external part is that if I take two hypothetical cities, and one's got the high level of education, one's got 50% high school graduates, the other one's got 60% high school graduates, does that impact the wages of everybody in that city? That's the external part, right? So all of a sudden you're getting paid more because he got his degree. Not because you got the degree, but because somebody else got their degree. That's the external benefit. So you're starting to get a bump up in pay because he went to school or she went to school, not because you went to school. All right, so wage benefits from a 1% increase in a city's college share. High school dropouts, 1.9%. So wages of high school dropouts go up by 1.9% when there's a 1% increase in the city's college share. So undergraduate degrees, 60,000 people, X percent have college degrees. If that X grows by 1%, high school dropouts get a bump in pay of 1.9%. That's the concept. And that's the external benefit. High school graduates, 1.6. College graduates, 0.4. What do you think about that story? That's what the data is showing, according to some economists who they're not citing here. But I guarantee you somebody wrote a paper that investigated that.
We're ready.
Oh, you found it? Okay. Yeah, it's not on the slide. 2004 study. Okay. Does that make sense? Sometimes it's fun to look back. This is what economists do. You look at the data and like, wow, that's what my computer program spit out after doing all the fancy econometrics and statistics. You know, does that make sense or is something screwed up? It's kind of your first blush look at data like this.
Makes sense.
So what do you think it makes sense? What's the story
Well, they're already
there?
a part of
Does
it.
that have some good intuition or not? By the way, some things are counterintuitive, but some things have a good gut feeling. I'm just asking you what your impressions are of this data.
College graduates are what's being measured, so they're the reason why the city that they're living in is increasing everything else already. So they're not going to experience as much of a growth as, say, the lower educated people who will, because the median income is rising.
Okay.
Or wage or whatever you're talking about.
Any other comments? Sounds like some principle of economics there. Little diminishing returns maybe to as you. So should I stay a dropout or should I get more education?
More education.
There's diminishing returns in terms of wage benefit to doing that, which is okay. It's still going up, but there's diminishing returns. So the external benefit is diminishing as you pursue more education.
Yeah, so like, I just want to make sure I understand it. So like, basically, could it all like seen as like, college graduates already have I think on average maybe not, but a lot higher pay than maybe high school dropouts. So their percentage that's increasing, like what increases for them could be the same increase as the high school dropouts, but it's a lower percentage of what their wage already is.
Mm-hmm. That could be. Yeah. Perhaps if we looked at the absolute gain, the absolute number could be relatively flat, but as a percentage, it's bigger. Yeah, could be. All right. So now we're getting into the demand-supply curve part. So we had like income and substitution effects. We got a similar thing here with the labor demand curve. These are explanations as to why we expect the labor demand curve to be downward sloping. Let's see, is this off screen? Oh, it is. At least to get this little sliver of the board. Still not good enough. Oh, that's right. I'm sitting here. I got to do this with this. I can control it.
Can't you just turn the swivel off and then rotate this?
I could with this, but I keep thinking that I might want to have it follow me at some point. Okay, so this next part, we start to focus in on labor demand, labor supply. I kind of intentionally wanted to think about them separately because we want to try to divorce ourselves of equilibrium. We want to come to that conclusion about where we're going ultimately. But for starters, try to think about why they look the way they do. Okay, so increased production cost, decreased output, substitution effect, increase in the wage. So what's going on here with our traditional graph that's kind of important? Are these shifters? Or what are they explaining? The substitution effect and the income effect, and why? Or the substitution effect and the output effect? Are they shifters? Demand shifters? Or what makes a shifter and what makes a non-shifter?
I just remember there were arrows. That's all I remember.
Yeah, there's arrows. Well, I'm kind of glad you brought up the arrows. What do the arrows mean? You talking about this?
No.
Oh, I thought that was the arrows you're talking about. Oh, shifters were the arrows with the lines moving?
No, there were arrows with the substitution and output effects on the
Oh, okay, yeah,
x-axis
that's
and
getting.
y-axis.
We're not going to that direction of at this point. We might actually do that down the road. I can't remember for sure. But we're just going back to principles class here. Simple shifters, or what did we call this one? When you said arrows, I was thinking of this.
That's a shift.
A movement along the curve, right? So the substitution effect and the output effect are describing a movement along the stationary demand curve, which is just justifying why it's downward sloping. A decrease in wage means that companies want to hire more labor, which sounds kind of like a no-brainer. Cheaper labor means I'll buy more. That's all it's describing. And so these are kind of dissecting that, which does come through an analysis of I guess, a different level. But simply put here, we've got these two things going on. Firms substituting inputs for relatively expensive labor, so that's that substitution effect that I kind of briefly mentioned there with the beer and pizza concept. And increase in production costs, increase in price, decrease in output. All right. Shifts. What causes the labor demand curve to shift to the right? One is an increase in the demand for export goods. Now wait a second, are we talking about international trade all of a sudden?
Export from the city.
Export from the city. So this is the city's labor demand curve. An important distinction that we haven't done in other classes for the most part, right? So this is the city's population. The demand for labor within our city, not the nation. And so when we start thinking about export goods here, we're thinking about goods that are demanded that are outside of our city that we're shipping away. So what else would cause this demand curve for labor to shift to the right?
Just to the right.
Yeah. You can do the left too if you want, but I was thinking to the right.
Productivity.
Productivity, okay. And how does that factor in?
As productivity increases per worker, the demand for skilled labor increases.
Okay. So if workers are more productive, they're willing to pay a higher wage. So the shift
Well,
here
competition makes
to
the wage
think
higher.
is that how much am I willing to pay the fifth worker? Well, the most I can pay the fifth worker, taking into account their productivity and everything else, the most I can pay that person is $10. Well, what if that person was twice as productive? What's the most you could pay them? Oh, well, now I can pay them $20. By the way, I said twice, and I just kind of, the number was about the same. It wouldn't have to be a perfect doubling of the wage, but the point is it'd be more. So we can think about the productivity shifting, moving out the labor demand curve.
Doesn't the setup of the city too, like a competition for the skilled labor, make them have to pay a higher wage for the more productive workers?
Yes.
Because
So
they become valuable for the other firm.
right, and so that gets into the localization economies, for instance, right, and how that might affect things. Land use policies. We're going to talk more about this as we go through the semester. We've talked a little bit about it before. What's a land use policy? Zoning. Okay, so the city's infrastructure, right? What's going on in there? If you're running a trucking company, is there thick enough concrete on the road where you want to locate the plant? Or does that road need to be beefed up to 8 inches from 6 in order to handle the size of trucks that you're going to be coming in?
Talking about BNSF right now?
No, well, not specifically.
That happened. I mean,
Yeah, I can imagine, yeah, because it,
I think they added like a half a foot to the concrete.
along that freeway where they
Yeah,
improve things.
yeah.
Yep. So that sort of stuff is plays a factor then in our city's demand for labor. The demand, again, always remember, is coming from the businesses. Okay. What's this connection?
I guess it describes all three of the things that you have listed there. If you increase your productivity and your workers, then your production costs can come down, and therefore your outprice, the price is going down, so you can increase their output. And then if you're increasing your output, you're going to increase your demand.
Okay. What's the connection here between cost and price, though? Because I'm thinking, isn't a decrease in cost mean an increase in profit?
Not if
Not if you have a competitive market, right? So that's right. So you got to remember that we're thinking in equilibrium again. Maybe there's a short run effect of a firm becomes profitable because of some sort of decrease in cost. But ultimately, we assume profits get competed away. It's one of our axioms. I can't remember which one. Anyway, no?
In the long
Number
run,
3, maybe? Axiom 3?
I didn't know the accent.
What'd you say?
prices will adjust to
Profits get competed away. Economic profits 0.
These are in our book?
Yeah, they're all at the chapter 1, I think, is when we had it.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, we can the rest.
Yeah, that's
No, that's not accent.
Number-
Prices adjusted to. 5.
5. I think they're in the summary just for future, aren't they? Oops, I'm in chapter 1.
We went over them in chapter 1.
Yeah. I thought they were in the summary of chapter 1. Page 7.
So that's what we're checking.
That might be a good page to. There we go. Okay. So what'd you say it was? Number 5?
competition.
Yeah.
generates-
Competition generates 0 economic profit. So just important to remember that that's not immediately obvious that those two things go together, but that's what's driving that. So we got these labor demand concepts. This graph is depicting a demand curve in our city with agglomeration economies as being flatter, and a demand without agglomeration economies being steeper. So my question is, trying to figure this one out, why does it cross? So agglomeration increases or decreases the marginal product of labor?
Increases.
Increases, right? So we've got the why.
Because
So this was kind of that clustering stuff, right? We got
product of labor is marginal product times the price, right, per unit of output.
that's into the demand for labor. So why would clustering, if we want to think about it that way, what we talked about back in chapter 2, the clustering of firms, the agglomeration, why would that lead to higher productivity?
competition among the labor pools.
We got the labor pool thing. What about the coffee shop? What are we talking about in our little city? The knowledge spillovers, right? So that was part of it too. So the thought was that when we have agglomeration economies, that our labor force is more productive. So what about this? So I'm trying to figure out, they got this thing crossing here. So at lower levels of workers, the marginal product has gone down from where it would be otherwise. Anybody got any thoughts there? I think I kind of get this, that with agglomeration, the marginal product is higher.
Less
Well,
work. I'm sorry.
Oh, go for it.
I was just gonna say less workers. The cost isn't it more per worker? Because you're diffusing the cost of less of a labor pool. If they're not agglomerated. You know
So
what I'm saying?
you're thinking when there's less people, the wage without is higher than what it would be here.
Maybe.
Anybody else?
Isn't it looking at almost the other side, whereas with an agglomeration economy, there's going to be more workers in the city than without?
There's more workers in the city, yes. Chelsea?
So what are you gonna do with like elasticity?
Which one's more elastic?
With
With agglomeration is more elastic, so yes. So that's what I'm kind of struggling with is whether what's going on over here. I actually wanted to open that up to you. If you guys come up with any great ideas, I don't think I agree with the textbook author on this part, but I'm not sure why. I'm thinking it looks more like, I'm thinking that it looks more like this. So here's without agglomeration economies, and here's with agglomeration economies. I agree about the less elastic part, but I'm having a hard time figuring out this, and as I read the text and looked for the answer, I think I agreed with everything I saw in the text that didn't refute this being the right graph as opposed to that being the right graph. But I'm not sure. It's an open-ended, fair question for you. If you guys, as you read through this chapter, if you find something there, bring it to my attention. But I wasn't quite seeing this, and maybe there is some other competing force going on that I'm overlooking on the small size. But I'm thinking it looks more like that with agglomeration, that it flattens out, but I'm just finding it hard to justify this part here, that would actually pivot. Okay, let's see, we're getting close to wrap-up time here. So, export versus local employment. How does export employment multiply employment?
Because the more you have export workers, then those services can take advantage of the scale economies from the large per capita demand, and so more and more industries will come in to meet the workers that are there.
Okay. So is it good to have more export employment than local employment? Is that the goal, is to try to get more export employment?
No, but a higher level of export employment will have increased your multiplier, and you'll have even larger sums of local employment.
Okay, good. So I like to think of this more as a growth thing rather than a shift. I don't want to take people who are doing one thing and necessarily shift them into something else within the city. But if we're attracting new people in, the result of them bringing and starting a new job here will be potentially have this multiplier effect, which we'll explore in more detail Tuesday. We'll call it a day there.
Homework?
Homework, yes.
No, turned in homework.
Yes, turn in your homework.
We're
And
not doing chapter
we will
5.
save the chapter 5. You guys will spare. So I want you to read through chapter 5 for Tuesday.
It's like
So that's a thing.
What is it? Cream cheese layer. Yes.
You're just fine. Come on, you can put